Buenos días para todas.
Good morning. We are going to get started with this panel on the relationship between the biodiversity laws and forced movements. On behalf of the representative of UN Colombia, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today in this space. We are fortunate to have a wonderful panel that we have developed specifically to have a broad representation of various areas of public power, especially we want to listen to the voice of indigenous and Afro-Colombian peoples. They have the floor. They should be at the core of the debate in every decision that is made. We have Enea Saavedra, coordinator of the indigenous community of Colombia and from the Yupa people, and Mrs. Cordova, legal representative of Black communities of the southern coast in the municipality of Acandí, Chocó, Natalia Angel from the Constitutional Court and president of the follow-up to this statement that declared this inconstitutional, especially regarding internal displacements. And this approaches forced displacement due to environmental factors. We also have Erika Castro, an advocate for collective rights, a lawyer specializing in territory protection, and finally, the representative, Mr. Sanchez, who together with other people are supporting a bill that is being discussed in our Congress to recognize displacement because of environmental degradation and climate change. We wanted to include UNHCR intervention here as an invitation for dialogue to continue. Has been incredible to see how many conversations have been enabled where we have all understood the intersection between biodiversity and climate change, environmental justice, the protection of nature advocates, the role of the return of land in territories, and peace building, among others. Today is the end of 2 intense negotiation weeks, and there is some progress in the 23 targets that were developed for COP. We would like to find out the fund for the restoration of Choco. In addition to being a rich biodiversity area in the second most biodiverse country, it is one of the areas also most affected by armed conflict and violence. These days, we have had the participation of women, which has been key, and we are so happy that in this panel, well, you are very welcome, but in this panel, there is a majority of women. We're happy to have the voice of very committed and powerful women as we have now. These days, many these initiatives have been recognized by the communities and civil society throughout our country, the country of beauty. To introduce this panel, I'd like to highlight a few pieces of information to provide a background of what we have called the nexus of this is one of the 3 largest global crises: loss of biodiversity, climate change, and forced displacement of millions of people throughout the world. As mentioned by the UNHCR, this crisis, this is what defines our time, and forced displacement has devastating consequences. There are huge populations throughout the world that are being affected by climate change, and the most affected countries most affected by conflict would have more disproportionate effects. It is estimated that 7 million people throughout the world have been forced to displacement because of environmental factors or disasters, and in Colombia at least 351,000 people have been displaced because of disasters and climate change events. We have some images that reflect that there is forced displacement due to armed conflicts and violence in areas where there is the most of the wealth and biodiversity in our country. So it is not a coincidence that this should happen. This coincidence of forced displacement and biodiversity. Over 70 people who are refugees, 70% of refugees throughout the world come from the most vulnerable countries to climate: Afghanistan, the Congo Republic, Yemen. So the risk in front of Colombia for environmental factors is middle to high, but it is calculated that most areas of the country may have some impact as a result of climate change. For us, the formula is perhaps simple, and there would be two main axes or two basic levels of intersection in this discussion. First, protection of biodiversity to prevent climate change effects and people displacement for environmental reasons. And second, attention and repair to victims and territories affected by forced displacement due to armed conflicts. That is where we believe there is an overlap of territories. We can see it on the screen in the map. We can see the territories where there is more biodiversity loss and increased displacement and confinement. Regions that are traditionally inhabited by Afro-Colombian and indigenous peoples. We have a legal framework for these cases of conflict and violence displacements and displacement for these factors: climate change, loss of biodiversity, disasters, environmental degradation, environmental factors in general. This has jeopardized the people's survival itself. So it is, as identified by the Constitutional Court and as reflected in the legislative bills, it is the time to deepen the dialogue between all sectors of civil society and the state at large to protect those who are protecting and defending biodiversity, taking this to nature-based resolutions with the protocol of indigenous communities and peoples. With this introduction and recognizing that in this legal framework we have ethnic laws for the law, there is an territorial and environmental damage when that decree affects natural ecosystem sustainability and of the territory. So restoration of the natural environment and these protection measures are fundamental conditions to guarantee the safeguard of the relationship between territory, nature, and cultural identity. All this has been defined in our legal framework, but we need to advance, and that is why we want to promote this dialogue on the steps we should take to implement these measures and create new ones to help us protect indigenous and Afro-Colombian peoples, protect biodiversity, and prevent displacements, forced displacements. I'd like to invite us to watch a video by the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia that reflects exactly the role that she has played as a leader protecting her territory of all these impacts. I do not fear defending my territory, and I believe what I lived as a child, all of these difficulties, all of that gave me strength and courage. It took my fears away. SNEDA is leading the fight for survival. Since the 1960s, the UCPA have been witnesses of how non-state armed groups have attacked, forcing them to be displaced to highlands where they are isolated. This Maracas River where our people, my ancestors, used to fish for their daily food supply. There has been environmental damage. They fell all the trees, and through the river is dry. Now the Maracas River does not have the flow it used to have 20 years ago. And this has been an environmental damage that has affected us, the Yukpa people. That's where we could fish to feed ourselves. Our territory is not protected. We continue to be cheated. We are victims of armed conflict. We remain victims of mining. Armed conflict is related to everything: mining, mafia, illegal crops. Well, mafia is all that. Sneda has been threatened and she has survived attacks. I am threatened within the territory for reporting, for telling the truth. When Sneda was only 8 years old, her father was killed by non-state armed groups. This tragedy and the influence of her mother fostered her commitment to protect her community and her land. My mother was a great leader. She is a great leader. And when I was young, together with her, I would be involved in all her fight, organization, and leadership processes. And I continued this leadership because I saw it was necessary. It was my duty to say, I am that woman who was born to defend the territory. UNHCR is supporting SNEDA's work to prevent displacements through the organization in Colombia, where she is an indigenous people's rights defender. There has been an articulation and joint work. And what's most important, as a Yukpa woman, what has been most important has been to visibilize the Yukpa people, their territory, as climate change adds to the threats faced by these people. SNEDA will talk to COP16 in Cali. Climate change has taken us to a much bigger problem: the loss of our crops and lack of food. We do not have enough food for our communities nowadays. We continue to resist, but we are going to contribute so that the entire world can continue to resist, protecting the environment, the territory, the air. We are here to make our contribution to humankind, to the entire world. Well, thank you so much, Sneda, for sharing your story, for allowing us to work with you, with Unique and with your community, based on your powerful testimony, with your video as an indigenous authority and as an advisor to UNIC, since you are a leader in the protection of your people and your territory. How do you believe we could take advantage of this time where we have the current situation in which all organizations and the international community are looking at the protection of biodiversity? What else could we do to continue to put indigenous peoples at the core of decisions? Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for this space. It is a very important space. First of all, we as human beings, not only indigenous peoples or the Yukpa people, have to make our contribution to defending and protecting biodiversity. From this space, we have the opportunity to start having this feeling of belonging. We have to start by feeling that we belong, with our land and biodiversity, which gives us life and food and everything. The earth gives us everything, and we need to understand indigenous peoples from their own knowledge, spirituality, which is one way in which the Guatillas, as we call non-indigenous people, and the Colombian state have not managed to understand why we defend the territory, why we are there, why we live or coexist with biodiversity. We, as indigenous peoples and Yukpa, we are also biodiversity. We are all biodiversity. We are part of it. Right here where this house is located, this is on top of the earth, of Mother Earth, and we need to start understanding and respecting, but also creating public policies that will truly defend the Aboriginal people's own knowledge, creating those public policies that will truly defend the territory so that it's not just on paper, but the territory is really protected from the essence and spirituality and the essence as human beings, because the territory is also a living being that gives us more than we ask. It gives us our livelihood. So this is the time where we should be listened to. Leaders and spokespersons of indigenous peoples should be heard. We are the spokesperson of Mother Nature. Mother Nature cannot speak about biodiversity, but we are also biodiversity, and we are their spokespeople. We express the feeling of our biodiversity, the feeling of Mother Earth, and that is why we are the spokespersons for it and for indigenous peoples. We bring the voice of Mother Earth and nature, of the pain suffered by the earth and us because it is being damaged. We have to create public policies to defend nature, and also public policies understanding social leaders, especially indigenous peoples, as well as Afro-descendants, and also peasants or farmers who are also part of it, and you and all of us who are part of planet Earth. Thank you, Esneda, for your words. It is very nice to recognize that we are all biodiversity, and we thank you for the potential or the power of your voice as indigenous peoples to convey the knowledge that you have. For us, other institutions, and we have the Constitutional Court, the Congress here present, they can hear you so that we can make progress with these public policies. This is the type of dialogue scenarios that we need to listen to one another and learn from you and have a policy framework that will contribute to solving this nexus between loss of biodiversity, climate change, and displacements. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Euridis Cordova, legal representative of Cocoma Sur in the municipality of Acandí, which is located in a strategic area for several reasons, including the impact of movements and peoples of thousands of people who go to North America. Last year, there was a proposal to talk about the Darien Reserve in the north, and you have been working in a sustainable community-based development project in one of the most biodiverse locations of the country. From your point of view, how should we support the work that is being conducted by Afro-Colombian peoples in protecting the territory? This is a universe of things. We cannot isolate things. from local development models. Each community process in their place according to the ecosystem dynamics. They adapt because there is no rule or policy saying this is your benefit. And if they are written, they are usually not enforced. And you need to do something related to demanding your rights. So communities develop our own forms of adaptation that are a model for conversations to take place in this location. There are things that have already been done. We do not need to invent anything. We just need to support and regulate. So in this context of differences and different ecosystems, in Akandi, in our municipality, there are two indigenous protected areas and three community councils. We are located in the border, in the jungle, what we call the Colombian Darien, which is strategic for many things. There are many interests. Mainly, it is our own interest to remain there. There, in the south of Akandi, is Cocomasur. Cocomasur is formed by 9 local councils who have organized according to generate our own development model based on conservation, protection of natural resources, and generation of employment for the community through community monitoring of resources. So in Acandino, Cocomasur, we monitor sea turtles, the forest. We have 13,000 hectares of protected forests. We have an ecosystem that is wonderful. I am a sea and river woman. The forest allows us to have a clear river that allows us to have the wonderful sea beaches for turtles to arrive to the Chilingo Beach and the area of San Francisco. I am describing this for you to understand how important it is for us to remain there. But there where we are, there is also pressures for the Darien, and there is a migration pathway. I'm not going to talk about that because there is enough information about that for whoever wants to learn. And you can ask UNHCR about it, because the truth is, visibilizing community work to remain on our territory is the most important. We have generated strategic alliances for a declaration of the biosphere reserve. This is a process that was supported by communities, not only Akandi, but also others. We were in the first conversations looking at the importance of finding strategic mechanisms to attract others to support the care we provide to this territory. What has happened in history is that there are people who want to use the Darien for economic reasons, and community people who do what we call resistance to remain there. And the way to remain there is to take care of ecosystems and biodiversity. There is no other way out. We cannot imagine Darien without its forests. I can't imagine my town, my village, without the Tolo River. I can't even imagine it without the rest of the people.
Migration has triggered interest in the youth. Please, if you could bring me some water. Just water, and I'll make it through. There's a wide array of offers for a new life with new livelihoods, better livelihoods. And the youth see an opportunity in that. And this is why they end up migrating. What we do in Cocomasur is engage in youth training so that they are also interested in staying in our territory as long as there's an opportunity for them. We have a youth, girls, and boys training program where we share territory based experiences with them, and we tell them how important it is for us to be part of our territory. We provide a training course every year where we invite the youth of different communities. Of course, we have limited number of places because we do have financial limitations, and they get training on ethnic and territorial rights, the importance of ecosystems for the territory, and sanctions. And after that, after theory, they participate in a hands-on training. They do forest monitoring. They work with turtles. They stock take. They also work with newly born turtles to save them from coastal erosion. And then they find a way to define, out of all the things that we have shown to them with a community council, what is it that they would love to develop or prefer to develop. And that implies some sort of commitment from the youth. After they are trained, they have to turn into community facilitators for our environmental and cultural house that brings together children, girls and boys, for after school activities. And the youth that have been trained commit to replicate that training and to train other girls and boys. This is how we are creating a cycle for ownership, knowledge, territorial knowledge, valuing our territory, and love and inspiration to stay in this territory. Thank you so much. We are inspired by what you say, definitely. And to continue dealing with territory protection, and in the hope that indigenous peoples can stay in their territories without being forcibly displaced, well, UNHCR also needs to come across intersections or cross-sectional issues to develop nature-based solutions with the communities. We had the experience of the Tu Antioquia fishing community, where they have very interesting conservation strategies for mangroves, and as a strategy to look for sustainable solutions but based on nature. So now we will see the example of species conservation developed by this community council. Go ahead. Cocomasur. It's a Black community, a community council of the Black community in the southern coast. Our ancestors came to this territory from the Chocó upper area. First families was the Córdoba family, and they started populating the territory, repopulating the territory. The Choco Darien Conservation Corridor is community-based. It entails 13,465 hectares. 10,000 of them are used for the Choco Darien Corridor project. The activities that we do in terms of monitoring is we do monitoring, bird watching, mammal watching, checking the quality of water based on the invertebrate conditions. We can see many different species of birds that are under threat of extinction. We take care of animals, we take care of biodiversity, and engage in conservation activities in the forests. There are two types of turtles that get to this coast, Cana and Coray. Cana is at a vulnerable state under threat of extinction, and the other one is under critical threat of extinction. We monitor turtles divided into two actions. We use sensors for their footprint, and we do night watch activities to monitor them during the nighttime. It is important to understand that when we talk about caring for the forest, we're talking about preserving life, not only as part of a community process, but the life of the whole country and, let's say, the whole world as well. I don't want to exaggerate, but I could say that right now, when we talk about ecosystem balance and climate change, climate behavior, I think that I really wish that treaties could entail including communities of each state. Unfortunately, this is not how this is approached. Our vision is that we should provide relevance to the communities that are the only ones that are actually acting around the world in a friendlier way towards the environment. So let's reduce whatever is causing climate change. Each step in our way is out of responsibility, part of our legacy towards our ancestors. The legacy that was left by our ancestors and that we need to transmit to our children as well. Thank you so much for sharing that experience through the video tape. Quite powerful, right? That quote, treaties should be carried out with states and communities, not just only between states without acknowledging the voices of peoples and communities. Now I will give the floor to Magistrate Natalia Angel. She chairs the follow-up courtroom to judgment TO25. And now she was engaged with T23 court order, which entails displacement due to environmental issues, which deals with people and communities that are forced to be displaced due to environmental reasons. I would like to ask you, how is it, or first, please tell us a little bit about the main milestones of this judgment, this court order, so that we can then cover the issue of displacement caused by environmental factors. Second question, based on the lessons learned in the past 20 to 25 years in this country in attending or in caring for victims of forced displacement, how can we innovate in terms of public policy to prevent environmentally forced displays? Thank you, UNHCR, for the invite, for being such a wonderful ally. And thank you to my colleague panel members. I was deeply moved. The truth is that the voices of communities should be at the core of what we do. at our courtroom, we are trying to give a voice to the displaced. We had different technical sessions, and I will definitely invite you to some of our coming technical sessions. Let me share many things with you. I always felt lucky because forced displacement was my focus area for many, many years. When I got the 123 case, I felt fortunate. We've been following up on a huge court order for 10 years or longer, and we got 4 claims for cases on internal FDI, forced internal displacement caused by environmental reasons, violence, armed conflict, and the court paid special attention to this case. We knew that this was going to be a milestone case. It's quite interesting. We're talking about 2 older farmers who lived in a lot by the Bojava River. The Bojava River, out of the Niña phenomenon, which is a recurring phenomenon, but as a result of climate change, it has increased in strength. The Bojava River overflows frequently, flooding the surrounding areas. So this family has to be displaced to the municipality area. So they came to the victims unit to ask for support as displaced persons. And the victims unit said, okay, my framework or my scope of action falls within the law or victims law. I can only serve victims of conflict or internal forced displacement. And they came to court, number one, so that different different reasons for forced displacement are acknowledged. We call them environmental factors. Some of you might be confused by this, but this is just to highlight that it includes natural disasters and other climate change associated events. We wanted to have a broad definition because the principles only talked about natural disasters, but we wanted to underscore that this also includes climate change related or associated events. So, forced displacement can also be based on reasons other than violence. The court took this case seriously. We have heard that a case had been filed, and we wanted this to be that we wanted this court order to be used as an example, right, as benchmark. And it was very important for us to showcase debates that were carried out, and we recurred to international standards on this topic. Although there's no specific international treaty on climate or climate-caused displacement, there are international standards that we could resort to. What did we find in terms of displacement related to environmental issues or climate change, natural disasters? We do not have too much case law or bibliography on the matter, but there are a couple of things that we already know by now. We know that we're talking about multiple causes. Human mobility should be understood as a multidimensional issue. Many forced displacements are triggered by slow phenomenon. We are used to rapid change and being able to rapidly adapt to changes, sudden changes. But in these cases, these are slow processes. let's say, food safety. When a community has or fails to have food safety, eventually they will need to be displaced. So we're talking about different dimensions to what we had diagnosed in the typical cases of violent or environmentally based displacement cases. So we need to pay attention to these details, right? Some of these displacements are caused by involuntary acts, but others may not. This could be voluntary acts. And we need to show the multi-cause characteristic of human mobility or forced displacement. In addition to talking about timelines and the fact that this phenomenon has a higher impact on the most vulnerable populations. There's also a very clear relationship between armed conflict and environmentally triggered displacement. Many people who are displaced due to violence or conflict end up settling in areas that are vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters. So at the core, what we try to do is to also cover the coexisting or simultaneous obligations of the government before, during, and post displacement. I have my friend here. A lot of what we have achieved in Cali is thanks to her. Debate in terms of displacement has been focused on guaranteeing sustainable or long-term solutions for the displaced communities. And this is something that we need to pay attention to. So we need to support Congress with a clear message. We need to have a comprehensive policy for prevention and support of displaced populations. Populations that are displaced due to environmental factors. We may see differences in this matter, so we need to fully analyze these complexities from every perspective. We knew already that this issue is quite complex in Colombia. We have over 9 million people who were displaced and are registered in the victims unit. There's a phrase that is quite moving for me. We cannot promise to victims something that we will not be able to fulfill. So we need to make sure that we develop policies that we will be able to enforce or fulfill. We already have 9 million victims registered in our log. So I think that the best way, even in economic terms, to respond to this phenomenon is to address it. It's not to hide it or to make pretend that it doesn't exist or turn a blind eye. According to all forecasts, global forecasts, this is climate displacement is only going to grow, and it will definitely beat violence-based displacement or displacement caused by armed conflict. This court order, and I think that what the Congress is going to do, will definitely have an impact, not only in our country, but elsewhere. We know that this is one of the main issues and dramas that we are facing as humanity. So this should be a comprehensive debate. We should tackle this issue. Instead of evading, we should definitely be proactive. And I always use the migrants statute as an example. We cannot make pretend or make do that we have no Venezuelan migration and turn a blind eye to that. No, we need to fully address the topic. Hands on. We need to join forces. We need to join voices to support the Congress who are working on a comprehensive public policy on the matter. So I wanted to just give you some input to help in finding a solution to this. Thank you, Natalia. We're not starting from scratch. That is very important. We need to innovate in our solutions to challenges that might not be new but are becoming more and more evident. Loss of biodiversity, environmentally and climate change related displacement today may exceed armed conflict, or violence based displacement. Today, we have no log or register to be able to see what is the exact number of people who is being displaced. And now we're going to talk about the 1, 2, 3 court order. It's like 1, 2, 3, ready, steady, go. We need to act, and we need to act now. Please help us understand where is the bill standing to acknowledge climate change based and environmental degradation based forced displacement. What are the challenges ahead of us, given that the other parliaments had discussed this and we still have no law on this topic? Thank you so much. Greetings, special greetings to my panel, the other panel members. Well, let's focus on the court order. We have certain issues that we need to focus on. We see this triangle: violence, poverty, inequality, and climate change. Those are the three legs of the stool. We're working with Camila Borges, my legislative leader, who is working on issues related to Escazú. And I said to her, this is the main topic, the hot topic. The more vulnerable communities are more exposed to climate change. If there's loss of food sovereignty and the price of food increases, who's going to suffer the most? If you need to move away from Buenaventura due to coast erosion, who's going to pay for that? So we decided to develop this project to disseminate information about it. And when we first went to Congress and started talking about IDP based on natural disasters, climate change, or environmental degradation, they looked at us as if we were aliens. So we started working on it. We invited Julia Miranda, we invited Blanca Alverde, Juan Carlos Lozada, and we got to the fourth debate. We were 1 day away from getting it, but between the commission meeting and the plenary meeting, we had to wait for 8 days, and they only allowed me 7 days. So that project was shelved. And we started again. And there was a previous order for 20-something. And then the 1, 2, 3 court. We worked with Alexis on this matter. It is very difficult. It's not just 1, 2, or 3 of us. Now we're talking about this topic within the framework of COP16. We're talking with UNHCR, and we are underscoring that all of us can be victims of involuntary displacement due to environmental regions. So I think that pedagogy is a key here. Training. What is this?
What is this bill about? Well, first, Colombia is a pioneer in this area, both on the side of the court of Congress recognizing and asking the state to recognize that there is forced internal displacement because of environmental degradation, climate change, and natural resources. That has to be recognized by the state so as to affect public policies, rights, and budgets. This recognition this is recognized as people who are damaged by this, by the victims. This affected them. So it's not that you need to just give them something. What about the children of the community who need education, health, and housing? This is involuntary displacement. So they are victims. The second is that there should be a single record or registry to have information, because now we know about 350,000 people in Colombia, 7 million throughout the world, but the government needs to have its own sources of information. So in the bill, through the national unit, we created a single registry of people, communities who may be victims of this, where there is a characterization knowing what municipalities and communities are the most vulnerable. Let's have that diagnosis so as to avoid it, to take measures that will allow us to prepare the communities. Otherwise, in Colombia, everything happens when it is already too serious. And then, through national planning, there should be public policy on this topic so as to know what are the government tools to to assist these displaced communities. Here, it is very important to know how this is going to be in a dialogue with our people who have been displaced by violent armed conflict. This is what we need to do to advance. One of the largest discussions was with the Women's Center. That prevented me from arriving there because I had to agree some proposals. Sorry, the Democratic Center, not the Women's Center. They were saying that this was too serious because it was going to compete with victims of armed conflict. Now, climate displaced people would be competing with guerrilla displaced or other displaced people. So, who were more important, the ones or the others? And I said, well, just a moment. It's different characterizations, and there may be victims of one or the other, or in this case, you may accumulate violences and facts affecting the communities. There, we managed to reach consensus and make progress. I think we are going to have the law passed. We are on the fourth item on the agenda in the Senate. It's going to arrive at my commission, and the president comes from the Green Party, so I believe it has possibilities. This discussion is broader, much broader. In the COP16, to be a protagonist, and I like this panel very much. I celebrate that we're having it. You know that we have a climate change COP, and the COP16 is for biodiversity loss. But in both, we should include that nature is a victim of the human species, and we are also victims of our own action. We are affecting the communities. And that is what the last water report says. 40% of the world population are suffering water vulnerability. We have no way to supply them. So the number one victim, who can live without water? Who can produce food without water? So people will displace where to find where to live. And that implies that public policy should understand how to prevent, adapt, and mitigate, or how to give rights to people who will be displaced, how to empower them, and how to prepare receiving cities, such as Cali. How can we prepare it so that when people arrive, it won't be worse than when people leave? Thank you. Thank you, Representative Duvalier, for explaining the current status of this bill. No doubt it is a first step to have a more comprehensive legislation that will allow us, as you said, to prevent, adapt, and mitigate climate change and loss of biodiversity. There are several ideas arising from this conversation, but I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the Environment and Collective Rights. Erika, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Given the commitment expressed by the first woman, the first ombudswoman, there are actions or aspects that should be included in the formulation of public policy, considering the protection of human rights as part of these policies. Secondly, we would like you to tell us displacements when there is these crimes that attack biodiversity and territories. There were activities last week in the framework of COP16. Would you please tell us something about that? Greetings, special greetings to my colleague panelists, and I want to thank and bring the ombudswoman greetings. She is unable to join us and she apologizes for that. And I want to thank UNHCR who have invited me. Before answering your question, Adriana, I would like to refer to the context to integrate and supplement what has already been said. First of all, our colleagues from indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants are discussing the main topic, a comprehensive understanding of this topic and how it should be approached from different points of view and from the public agenda. We need a comprehensive understanding of the territory. It is the territory with the populations, with the goods on the territory. So we need to approach nature. They discuss something that has been repeated to us on a daily basis. COP16 has had 2 weeks of wonderful events, repeating, insisting on this, and I am marveled at the opportunity that indigenous peoples and Afro people have had to come and remind us of this here. We cannot continue talking about with nature, for nature. We are nature. We are here because nature, the mother, has us here. We are water, we are soil, we are air, a separate entity. There is a context that has been provided by the modern age. There is a biodiversity crisis, a planet crisis, a climate crisis, and of course, a very serious crisis that I would consider about environmental deterioration. That's where our conflict arises from, this attack on our Mother Earth. That is where I see the problem. But it's not it is mothers, and nature is screaming this at us. And there are these rebel sons and daughters who do not want to learn and who insist and insist. So this comprehensive understanding of the territory, being humbled by the wisdom of Mother Earth, it is there that we should find the understanding to what's happening. This issue of displacements involves us as a human species. It involves all living beings and everything that is the grounds for life. There is an intrinsic relationship here. This relationship is that we are deteriorating the basis for life, but there will be nowhere to displace. We will have to displace, but we will have nowhere to go because we are deteriorating everything. We are damaging everything. So we are talking about displacement, about an adaptation measures, but where do we think we're going to go? To Mars if we continue like this? There is a change required. As our mothers say, those who are knowledgeable, those who have the wisdom, are telling us that we are focusing on the wrong side. We should not continue to believe that we are the ones to know. This requires, and that is why I wanted to provide you with this. It is true that this is a multi-cause phenomenon, and since it is a multi-cause phenomenon that we see from social sciences, environmental sciences, well, of course, there's going to be all these causes, but it's actually an issue related to human condition. It is there that we should see the first message. I love it that we started with that message, right? You said it, and it is exactly that we should there that we should go. So our first discussions, where do they take place? On the territory. Colombia, but not only Colombia, but the Latin American region, the islands started this conversation many years ago. Those who believed that we were the only experts, the IPCC was saying this in 1990, but we had to wait until 2010 when the Cancun COP, I'm talking about the climate change system, I had to say that human mobility existed. That is part of the selfishness of humankind. Now, communities, this affected biodiversity, was already screaming at us, shouting this out. But that is how we need to talk. We need to talk in these terms of something that is very relevant. We should have it's important that we recognized in 1992 that participation is important. That is why in Rio in 1992, then the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Framework Convention on Climate Change, they all took place at the same time. And that is why all these agendas are joined. And now the Escazú Agreement, the Biodiversity Convention, not only the Escazú Agreement for the Latin American area, but the Aarhus Convention for the rest of other states, for instance, European states. Those two conventions talk about access to information, participation, and environmental justice. The Escazú Agreement is talking about the protection of advocates, of environmental advocates. The UNFCCC is telling us that we need to defend the basis to be able to talk about a healthy climate. And the Biodiversity Convention is talking about nature and Mother Earth. And all of these agendas should go together. We have realized with time that they should go together. This COP16 has been called the COP of people. And that is at the core. And it is from there that we need to discuss displacements instead of separating these affairs. When we managed to have this much broader overview, it is much easier to talk about this topic saying there is nothing we can do with displacements as it has been done traditionally in this country. There is a flooding and immediately the system is activated. You know, we have this disaster risk management system declaring a public calamity. Immediately, we will directly contract with contractors, which is very good for territories. What for? To provide food for the food emergency. we will see those who have had a subsidy for their housing, and that is the solution. So it's a short-term mentality, and we are not understanding the phenomenon from the territory as it should be understood. So in this context that I wanted to put on the table, this is a context on which we need to discuss. It's a topic that has been discussed for many years, but it was not part of the public agenda. And when communities talked about this on the territory, they would look aside because the discussion on the territory is, you are not paying attention to me. You are not taking me to participation spaces. I have no idea about the relocation processes.
And this is what has contributed to the fact that what we call displacement, and it is interesting because in Colombia we do not talk about displacement. The issue is entitled migration. I agree with Magistrate Judge Natalia. So migration is understood as a voluntary act, and it is not. Within the framework of loss of biodiversity and climate change and natural disasters, people migrate because they can no longer live in their territory of origin. I'm about to conclude, but let me share three other topics. Number one, migration. Number two, displacement. It is clear that people do not have what they need to stay within the territory. They have no power, no support from the government. Number three, relocations or resettlements or program resettlements. And number four, relocated populations. The 123 bill covers this topic comprehensively. And it says to the executive, we need to approach this from a comprehensive standpoint. This is why this law is one of the most comprehensive ones in Latin America. We had we talked about this topic as part of the preliminary meetings for COP29. We're discussing the framework of the convention, and we're trying to determine how we are going to assess or value changes and damage caused by human mobility. And I said, well, we should analyze this from a broader standpoint. We're asking ourselves, how can I differentiate the value or the cost of a disaster in terms of loss of biodiversity, loss of culture, loss of cultural identity and land? And on the other hand, versus what is the cost of a process of displacement, resettlement, and maintaining communities that were temporarily crossing a country and finally settled in it. So at COP29, we need to discuss this deeply. And now we're talking about this wonderful court order judgment that says these are the dimensions or the features that should be included in a policy, including the Piñeiro principles, for example, the pre, during, and post processes. So we celebrate this, and I also support it as part of the Public Defender's Office. And this is the recommendation that we would like to share with you. The bill is focused on displacement. I don't know what can be done in Congress, but I really wish that this phenomenon would be referred to comprehensively as human mobility so that humans are not at the core of the bill. Otherwise, this is an anthropocentric project and biodiversity is set aside. We need to focus on the whole territory So public policy has to be thought from a different perspective. This is called by the Public Defender's Office. Finally, public policy issues. The legislative is facing the opportunity to clearly set out the jurisdiction and scope of each authority and each legal system that take part in the four processes along the lines of a public policy. Maybe this could be done. What is the jurisdiction of migration authorities? What is the jurisdiction of risk authorities, risk management, housing department? And then we need to identify cross-sectional issues. For example, the human rights system. Sorry if I went over my allotted time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erica. This was quite a comprehensive explanation of the different systems. And I take note of a message that we need to better articulate the different agendas for next COP29. And we need to definitely develop a deeper strategic vision for the longer term, acknowledging the rich assets of each territory. To conclude, what do you think are the next steps to continue having this dialogue that combines loss of diversity, of biodiversity, climate change, and human displacement? We need to continue engaging in dialogue to further protect leaders and indigenous communities, indigenous peoples, Afro-Colombian communities, farming communities. We need to support them in the protection of a territory and to prevent armed conflict-based displacement. Duvalier, I would start with you. What do you think is the next step based on our dialogue? I really like a phrase by Schopenhauer. You need to know what you want. And what we want from the Public Defender's Office and the Constitutional Court is something that we have identified, but we also need to understand what is it that we can do. Otherwise, you have a mismatch between the expectations and your reality. What's clear here is that we are willing to act. And it is quite common in the Pacific territories that you try to remain where you were born, right? It's like you are deeply rooted in your territory. Displacement is the last resort. We need to try every other opportunity. Protecting biodiversity, creating conditions for development, streamlining communities. And this is what we're trying to accomplish here. I said something at the Interparliamentarian Forum. We are lost if we think that heads of states are ever going to solve this issue. Unless communities and local governments are involved, it's going to be very difficult to solve this issue. Otherwise, we will be constantly depending on political will. And apparently, there's not enough of that. So we need to try to bring peace to world conflicts. After 9/11, they acknowledged that terrorism is a global problem. So what should happen with climate, with our planet, What should happen, for example, that will cause fear in our politicians for us to be able to acknowledge this? See what happened during the pandemic. Politicians were afraid of that, and they acknowledged that we have no time to act. We can continue on and on with this conversation, this dialogue over coffee forever. Maybe a bite to it as well. But well, there are several issues that I like to underscore. When you're saying mainstream or integrate communities to your plans and your development, I would rather say let's make it the other way around. Get integrated in what we're doing, what the communities are doing, in spite of the loss of biodiversity, the loss of forests, coastal erosion. We are still here because we do have solutions and strategies that allows us to continue living in these territories. So we need to we need to build developing strategies based on the communities, not plans that are built up above hierarchies by people who do not know our territory. They cannot plan our lives. I live my territory. I plow my territory. I plant it. So I should plan it. They should hear our voices, and only then might this scenario change. If there's a plan or willingness to live in a certain territory, the necessary economic resources should be allocated, or to make sure that that people or community can continue living in a certain territory. So we need to strengthen human administration or management for communities. I know that we are not at a level where we can manage funds as banks do. But when we talk about capacity building in resource administration or management, we should develop strategic plans to provide for support, for joint strategies to strengthen governance. Governance is not just about having us invited to talk in this fora, but it's to be able to execute or implement the plans that we put together with legislations and decision makers. There's definitely a relationship between loss of biodiversity, climate change, and displacement. But there are other interests at stake. For example, the economy of a certain territory. And we see this on the media outlets, on the media, and we disseminate news triggering interest. But if news would be focused around how beautiful territories are and what communities are doing, beneficial acts that communities are engaging in, I think that everything would change. Let me conclude. Unfortunately, we always have limited time, and this has been a problem for us because we need to be able to listen to each other carefully. I'm here surrounded by two decision makers. I don't know if I'm right. I have a congressperson, a person from the legislative, and one from the judiciary, and also public defenders representative. And if we have seen this climate change, this was not caused by nature. I'm the Perija Hill. I'm a farmer. I'm a nomad. I'm a fisher, a fisher person. I'm a collector. Changes are not caused by nature per se. The Maracasia River is not dry because nature did it. It's a distracting hand that deforested 14,000 hectares of surface. It wasn't nature. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to get to know and learn about the stories of each territory, of each people and community. Maracasio has been detoured. What are they doing vis-a-vis this situation? It's not just building bills or developing bills or articles. That's not what works for me as a human being. What is that we're going to do with the destroying hands? What are the policies? What are the laws, articles, or codes? What are the sections that apply to them? There's a long standing history. I know that time hits us hard. And let me share an example with you because this is the same problem shared by indigenous peoples in Colombia and in many other countries on account of climate change. And that is that the Perija Hills area was full of life, was full of health, harmony, dignity, food. I could get to the Maraca River and fish and take 4 fish and bring them home. I can no longer do that. So we need to express our gratitude towards the organization, the UNHCR representatives that have assessed the territory. I invite magistrates, judges, Congress people to design bills not from your desks or your offices. Come visit us first. Visit our territories, visit our rivers, visit our birds, visit our snails and shells. Today, we lost the Sororia species. Sororia is also the name of a mining exploitation area. What do you think? We lost this Sororia snail. So, how do we get back? How do we recover Sororia snails? And my colleague in this struggle was crying. When a woman cries, no, a woman only cries, for example, when we lose a child. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a grandmother, and I'm crying. I don't want to see my territory completely devastated or exhausted, triggering displacement. Why do we see displacement? Because distracting hands engaged in illicit smuggling, mining activities in this territory focused on the economy without taking care of nature. And this is what economy is focused on today. I will exploit the hill. I will trade timber because I will get money out of that. But when the owners, the custodians, that it's us, and we say, don't fell this tree, don't destroy the species. When we do that, we are threatened and we end up being displaced. But climate change has already caused damage, has already.
In the Guajira, how many trees? We have evidence, and that is why I'm threatened, because I was the first Yukpa woman to express that there should be no more mining. It is killing us, it is destroying it, it is changing the entire world. Climate change, water is drying, they are detouring the river, fish are no longer there, the environment, nature is so beautiful that it has its cycle and its laws and its rules and its knowledge and wisdom. We know, we used to know when the fish were going upstream, when to fish, when not to fish, when to collect or not, when to harvest or not. When I say that we lost our food, it is because tree felling to have illicit crops, for overexploitation, for mining. That is the economy for the national government or for people who do not think about nature. That has been the damage. And it is there that climate change starts. And Mother Nature will also reveal, because I damaged it, my unknowing hands without knowing have damaged the environment. That is why we have earthquakes and flooding. It is the earth that is claiming, and only us who live there understand the earth. And when there are when there are earthquakes, we know how to connect with the earth, because it hurts when there are victims of an earthquake. Come, Mother Earth, we know that humankind has damaged you. My mother always says, bring it. Bring it, because we never know. There is climate change. Mother Nature is also claiming for the damage it's being caused. And we are damaging. And I apologize, but Congress people, governments, you don't understand that. When? When will you understand the damage? When will you understand that we have this mutual relationship? To come here, I went to the tree, to the river, and I said, I am going to be your spokesperson. I came to the birds and asked them for strength, because I'm going to be your spokesperson. It's not that I just want to talk. It's not that I want to drop my tears. This is the reality. You need to know history. Why climate change? Why weren't so many things 100 years ago, and the Yukpa people now cannot grow our crops? We used to have a calendar that was very precise. We would have the exact dates, a date to sow, a date to harvest. We knew when it was going to rain, while now there is no control. Everything is out of control because of these unknowing hands. And why displacement? Because these hands thought negatively. They thought that they could fell the trees, sell the wood, and get money. But they were not thinking about the future as we do, who are the guardians of the territory. And if we continue to degrade land and take minerals, and what about the air? What are we going to live? I don't think that a sum of money will give us air, breathing, food, and that has resulted in conflict, and armed groups have been there to see what they could take out of it. And I am not scared to say it, as I said in the video. I do not fear. I am a woman defending Mother Nature, and I do not fear tell the truth. With mining and with all this destruction, where they see the amount of money they can get out of it, they all have their hands there. They are all asking for something. When you don't give them what they want, they threaten you. And if you oppose, as I did, if you raise your voice against mining, you will be attacked as I was. I am threatened. I continue to be threatened, and I will continue to be threatened because my voice for nature, for Mother Earth, will never be shut. So it will never be silenced. I invite you all to get to know better our nature, to have this spirituality and mutual relationship that is very nice, and you will see the results. And we should all help protect biodiversity. Thank you so much. Thank you. We are running against the clock. We have run out of time, but the COP is closing. These 2 weeks of negotiations. This is a learning process for each of us to learn to know better the impact of climate change and the loss of biodiversity, how this affects peoples and territories. I'm going to give you the floor. We need to finish this panel. I'd like to listen to your final conclusions. Well, I would like to give you some messages that we have learned. Every time we go to the Constitutional Court, we visit the territory. We try to do that, and we want to thank the UNHCR for having supported us in doing this, because you are so right. You cannot have develop public policy or draft a law if you do not gather the experiences of the communities, who are the ones to have the best responses that give us ideas. But it is not that there is no value in developing public policy in this regard. The message should not be that we shouldn't have public policy, but rather that we should have good public policy considering the experiences of the communities. And there, I will support Duvalier, because those of us who were involved in public policies trying to make progress with them and advance them, we know that sometimes you need to get started. If we want it all, it's likely that it won't happen. So I insist that we need to get started. It is very ambitious. I believe that there are some strengths to it, but I understand not everything will be achieved, and I understand the negotiations around it. It is valuable to get started. What things have we learned? I think there are 5 things I can mention. First, we learned about the importance of joint work and shared responsibility. Each of us should make our own contribution, and it's important to bear that in mind. Of course, the second learning is that this has to be based on the community's experience, and that is very clear to us all in everything that we have done throughout these 20 years. Third, it is fundamental to strengthen the local authorities' capacities. Although we are talking about a bill from Congress, really the territorial response is very important. So there are displaced people. Something that I have mentioned to our dear friend is economic and social integration as pillars for the solution, because long-lasting solutions should not just remain in words. So there should be, you know that there is some philanthropy in government's reports, but you need to materialize these things. And I believe that we need to add the voices and commitment of society claiming an effective reply. Thank you so much. Thank you, madam. I insist, it is a great opportunity. I hope that we will be able to strengthen this. We won't be able to do it all, but I will say something very clear.
Y su
Legislator has a certain responsibility, which is called competencies or jurisdiction. We cannot define public policy, otherwise we would be going back to Congress. So at least the House of Representatives should clearly define jurisdiction and not having public policy rebound or not applied because there's no regime stating jurisdiction. Expert knowledge is ancestral, it's popular, it's traditional, but it's also scientific and technical. My message would be that we should consider all of them at the same level. And the third message is we need to engage, engage, and engage. Thank you. It's been quite challenging to share this panel with all of you and with UNHCR. Thank you so much for your time and for allowing us to engage in this dialogue, this process of dialogue, in this pathway towards learning. We have lessons learned in terms of how we have supported in the past from the Colombian state, the different communities that are victims of displacement, forced displacement due to armed conflict and violence. So we need to work on those or build on those learnings and innovate based on your findings. I would like to underscore that we need to continue facilitating discussion over the 123 Bill of Law. And we need to strengthen this bill. And we need to identify scope and competence and jurisdiction so that we do not waste time in public policy making terms. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, because it's based on your knowledge that we are learning today, and we want to continue advancing, basing our work on the communities, working with the territories, with the local processes, with local leaders, male and female leaders. And it's quite concerning to hear that whenever your voices are raised, you are faced with threats. So we will definitely work about that. When we talk about protecting nature, we're definitely including nature defenders. And thank you to all of those who could make it, Ana Maria, Daniela, Laura, etc. Johnny and Daniel, who have been critical in organizing this panel. So thank you to our colleagues in Bogota. You can count on us, and we will continue moving forward.